Good evening to you both. And Rob, good to have you back on the panel.
Yeah, good to be back.
All right, let us begin with Elections Alberta clearing the way for petition signatures to now be collected for an approved referendum question. That question asking, do you agree that Alberta should remain in Canada? Former Deputy Premier Thomas Lukaszuk, behind the citizen-led initiative, and his Alberta Forever Canada group now has until October 28th to collect more than 290,000 signatures for the question to be considered in a referendum. Duane, what has now been set in motion? Does this become a petition quietly collecting signatures? Does it take on the air of an election?
I think it's a petition, but it's awfully complicated, right? So there are numerous questions. Question one is the threshold. Because the government and Elections Alberta is saying they need 297,000 signatures, even though they proclaimed a lower threshold the day after the question was approved, but before they started to gather signatures. So what is the actual threshold on this? Then we have the issue about whether this is a referendum question or simply a policy initiative. Now, Thomas Lukaszuk has said this is simply a policy initiative. So even if they get the number of signatures, this won't lead to a referendum. And then that leads into whether there will be a subsequent referendum question, because the Alberta Prosperity Project has put forward a separate question dealing specifically with a referendum. Now, the legislation says you can only have one question. But what happens if one question is a policy initiative and the other is a referendum? Does that make a difference? Or if Lukaszuk doesn't meet the higher threshold, does this one kick in? And then we'll have to see what the courts determine, because Elections Alberta has handed that off to the courts to determine if it is constitutional.
Yeah, Rob, to Duane's point, hugely complex. So how do you see the political establishment factoring into the conversation as Lukaszuk's group takes their effort forward? Either the UCP or the NDP express any kind of positioning, or do they remain neutral?
Well, it's kind of funny because the UCP has claimed that they want to be neutral in all of this and hands off and will let the process play out. Look, I mean, if Danielle Smith wants Albertans to vote on this or vote on a specific question, she could announce a referendum tomorrow, but they're steering clear, except that they're also getting involved. So Duane mentioned how they sort of pose some obstacles to Thomas Lukaszuk's efforts, and it's almost like they're going out of their way to lend a bit of an assist to the separatist side. So as per the law, in a constitutional question, the chief electoral officer can get clarity from the court. That's how the law was written by this UCP government. That's what the chief electoral officer is doing on the Alberta Prosperity Project's question. But then you have the weird spectacle of both the justice minister and the premier saying that he shouldn't do that, which is spelled out in the law. And I mean, it just seemed like they were responding to the fact that the separatists are frustrated, that there's a delay or some uncertainty regarding their questions. So if the UCP is really kind of neutral in all of this, why are they getting involved? Why are they interfering with the way the chief electoral officer is following his own, the legislation as it's written? He's doing what he's supposed to do. So that seemed a little curious to me. It will be interesting. Look, if Thomas Lukaszuk and his group get enough signatures, it is kind of up to the premier. Like, she can put that question to a referendum, and Forever Canadian, they've done it in a way that sort of flips the yes and no around, or they could just do something in the legislature, deal with it that way, and maybe we don't end up getting a referendum. So there's a bit of uncertainty as to where this is all going to go, but it was significant, I think, to see these developments this week and to see the extent to which the government's prepared to tinker in all of it.
Duane, I guess at the end of the day, the Lukaszuk group still has a whole bunch of signatures to collect, no matter what the end number ends up being. So how steep a hill do they face?
It is a steep hill. That's one of the reasons that the Smith government lowered the threshold to make it easier. We'll have to see, because it's not just about gathering signatures. Before you can even do that, you have to organize lots and lots and lots of volunteers to be able to gather those signatures. And so when you talk to Thomas Lukaszuk, he believes that they have the volunteer base to be able to do that. But anybody who's launching a recall petition or an initiative will claim that. The test will be the numbers that they have. And just as an illustration, we went through a recall petition in the city of Calgary to remove Mayor Gondek not that long ago, and they were unable to achieve that. They didn't even come close to achieving that. We'll have to see if this will be any different.
Rob, you touched on the question on separation being referred to the Court of King's Bench and how the Premier and the Justice Minister responded to that. How far do you see the government taking its position? How might it respond if the courts reject the question?
Well, that becomes very interesting, right? If the court says it's an unconstitutional question, because the law says you can't put an unconstitutional question to a referendum. So if the court comes back and says it would be unconstitutional to put this to a referendum, where does that leave us? So I think it's a fine line that the Premier and the government are trying to walk here. Danielle Smith has already made it clear that, yes, she does worry about a political split on the right or an upstart kind of separatist party splitting the Conservative vote and posing a challenge to her. I think she's well aware of the circumstances that deposed her predecessor, and I think she's hoping to avoid that. At the same time, I think she's trying to keep the separatist issue enough on the back burner that she can try to find some kind of policy win where either she moves forward on initiatives that sort of assert Alberta's sovereignty, or she can get some kind of a win from Mark Carney on pipelines or other energy infrastructure, and she can say, look at me, I saved the day, and I've taken the wind out of the separatist sails. So she's trying to navigate all of that while at the same time worried about something that might antagonize the separatists enough to say, well, Danielle Smith is too weak or too soft, or she's not doing enough, and maybe we need to turn up the heat on her. So I think she's trying to thread that needle and walk a fine line here.
All right.
And let's add to that, if we don't have a referendum on Lukaszik's question, but it goes to the legislature for a vote, is that going to be a whip vote? Is that going to be a free vote? We know how the NDP caucus will vote, but there are separatists within that UCP caucus. And what does that do to party unity, as Rob was mentioning?
Closed-door meetings this week between Alberta's Transportation Minister and the Mayor of Calgary over the contentious issue of bike lanes, with more to come.
We're having these conversations with both Edmonton and Calgary and identifying bike lanes that obviously don't make sense.
About 1% of our road network accommodates bike lanes. In some spots where people have expressed some challenges, it is possible to explore other solutions.
Devin Dreeshen claims bike lanes are creating traffic and making downtown parking difficult, and the minister isn't ruling out provincial legislation to remove existing lanes, despite Calgary's mayor saying a review is needed. First, Rob, I'll start with you first this time. A nice, comfortable conversation on bike lanes Wednesday between the minister and the mayor. Is this the municipality and the province working together to find a middle ground without things getting potentially messy?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we've got municipal elections coming up, and I think Jyoti Gondek is conscientious of the potential pitfalls around this issue. I mean, I think there's a reason why the province is making a fuss over this, is because I think the public opinion would certainly lean toward more roads, and there's frustration and opposition to bike lanes. I think that's just the reality. So I think it's partly Jyoti Gondek maybe not wanting to go too far out on a limb on this issue and create problems for herself, and maybe at the same time just trying to diffuse this. Let's get this off the headlines, right? I mean, if there's a big fight between Calgary and the province over bike lanes, and that drags out for days or weeks, right, that becomes a bigger issue leading up to the fall election. So I think it's a way of trying to get this off the front page, to try to move the conversation to something else. But, there's a reason why the province raised this in the first place. I think they see this as kind of a winning issue for them, that they're stepping in and dealing with, crazy progressive lunacy at the city level. But, at the same time, look, this is an Alberta government that's telling Ottawa to stay in their lane. It's a little hypocritical, maybe, that they're interfering what are typically municipal government decisions.
So, Duane, what is to be made then of Minister Dreeshen indicating that while he doesn't want to go down the road of introducing legislation to remove bike lanes, he will if the government feels it needs to?
This is not the first time that Minister Dreeshen has jumped into municipal jurisdiction. We saw that over photo radar. We saw that over the C train LRT battle in Calgary. So to Rob's point, the provincial government is very clear that the federal government needs to stay in its lane, but the provincial government, not so much. They often veer into whether it is the train lane or the bike lane or the fast car lane. That's what the provincial government has been doing. And so you really start to wonder, what is the role of provincial governments if they appear that they can't bring in zoning bylaws and they can't have photo radar and they can't dictate the route of LRTs and they can't put bike lanes in? What is the purpose of a municipal government?
So Rob, how closely do you think Alberta will need to watch what's playing out in Ontario around a judge's ruling there on constitutionality of the Ford government's plan to remove a trio of Toronto bike lanes?
Well, yeah, it's funny because it's almost like what was going on in Toronto might have prompted this here, right? I mean, so Doug Ford got involved and was sort of telling the city of Toronto, you need to pull up these bike lanes. And I do wonder if, the UCP was watching all of that and thinking, hey, maybe that's, that's a good idea for us. We could do the same here. But yeah, this court decision is really interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, you still got the reality where municipalities are creatures of the province. So to Duane's point, I mean, do we really want provinces dictating everything municipalities do? I guess technically they could if they really wanted to. So where's the line here between, the responsibility that provincial governments have over municipalities, the responsibilities municipalities do have? And I guess in all of this, too, there's kind of the rights of cyclists. But I don't know. I mean, the idea of a right to bike lanes is kind of a novel judicial or legal concept. I'm curious to see where this case goes. But yeah, I think it's going to have an impact here.
And Duane, in terms of municipalities, this is not just a conversation involving Calgary. The mayor, or the minister rather, indicated in the clip we heard off the top that Edmonton's part of this as well. So what does City Council in Edmonton need to be looking forward to?
I think some of the same conversations. And again, as we've mentioned, we are on the eve of municipal elections. And so how much are bike lanes going to play a role in this? We already know that the provincial government has changed a lot of the rules around municipal elections, including the introduction of party systems, of adding corporate and union donations. So this is going to be a very unusual set of civic elections, at least in the big cities, come the fall.
So, Rob, you get last word on this. Does this all boil down to municipal elections coming up in October?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, right. And I think, look, the UCP is a ways away from an election, presumably a couple of years away from an election. So I don't know that they're doing this to help their cause necessarily, but I do wonder to what extent maybe they're doing this to help the cause of conservative candidates in both Edmonton and Calgary. And I think it was one of the reasons why they wanted political parties, was the perception that conservative political parties could be a bit of a boost or a lift to conservative candidates in Edmonton and Calgary. So yeah, definitely, I think this is aimed at kind of getting this to the forefront, making this an issue. And I think it's an issue that conservative politicians, provincial and municipal, see as kind of a winning issue for them.
All right. On that note, gentlemen, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.